Part 1. The frozen gates of hell. They said the cold could kill faster than a bullet. By dawn, we started to believe it. The year is 1941. Across the endless plains of Russia, the German army's steel tide has begun to freeze. What was meant to be a swift conquest operation Barbarossa now crawls to a halt beneath an unforgiving sky. The temperature has plunged below 30 C. Rifles jam from frost, and men hammer their boots to keep blood flowing in their toes. Horses collapse mid-step, frozen stiff before they hit the ground. In the snow-choked wastelands outside Moscow and Stalingrad, the war has changed its shape. No longer a contest of tactics or machinery, it has become a war against nature itself. Our breath turned to ice on our faces. We envied the dead because they no longer felt the cold. German infantry diary 1942. As winter deepened, uniforms meant for autumn parades became coffins of cloth. The Wehrmacht, stretched to its limits, lacked proper winter gear. Soldiers tore curtains from occupied homes to wrap their legs. Some traded bread for gloves, others their sanity for warmth. In contrast, the Red Army learned to live with the frost. Russian soldiers burned engine oil to heat trenches and slept wrapped around one another, conserving every degree of life. The snow was their ally, the cold their camouflage, and soon the tide began to turn. They came at dawn, out of the fog white ghosts with bayonets. We couldn't tell if they were men or the storm itself. Eyewitness account. Battle of Moscow. As Hitler's dream of a swift victory froze to death in the Russian winter, soldiers on both sides began to face a deeper enemy, the slow collapse of the human spirit. The frostbite wasn't just in their fingers, it crept into their minds. Letters home grew shorter, words colder. Hope was rationed. Like bread, it wasn't war anymore. It was survival against the land, against time, against ourselves. Private Alexander Ivanov, Soviet infantry, and yet, amid that desolation, there was courage, small, quiet, and defiant. Men shared the last crust of bread, covered fallen comrades with snow to give them a grave, whispered prayers that froze before reaching heaven. They fought not for glory, but to endure one more night. If this story moves you, if these forgotten winters speak to something deep in you, remember to subscribe and join us as we uncover the untold human stories behind history's harshest battlefields. Part 2. Stalingrad. The city that froze in fire. We thought we were fighting men. Then we learned we were fighting the cold, the hunger, and God's silence. Winter, 1942. Stalingrad, once an industrial heart of the Soviet Union, now lies buried beneath smoke, rubble, and ice. Streets have no names anymore. They are numbered by the bodies that line them. The Volga River is frozen, a glittering tomb for thousands who tried to cross. German troops, trapped inside the shattered ruins, fight not for victory now, but for survival. At night, the frost crept into our bones. The bread froze like stone. We had to slice it with bayonets. Field diary. 6th Army Corporal, December 1942. By now, the once mighty German 6th Army is encircled, a steel coffin of 300,000 men. The temperature plummets to 40 C. The wounded freeze where they fall. Medics pour vodka on bandages to thaw them. There are no blankets left, no winter coats, no hope of rescue inside the basements and factories. Men live like ghosts, whispering prayers to furnaces that have long gone out. We burned anything we could find: books, furniture, even the wooden handles of our rifles. The fire gave no warmth. It only reminded us we were still alive. Letter never sent, found near Stalingrad ruins, across the frozen wasteland. Soviet soldiers endure the same torment. Many are barefoot, their boots long rotted away. Yet the will to defend their homeland burns hotter than the winter itself. For us, there was no retreat. Behind us was the Volga, and behind the Volga nothing. Soviet Sergeant's log, January 1943. The Battle of Stalingrad becomes more than a clash of armies. It is a collision of endurance, ideology, and the very limits of human suffering. Men kill for a crust of bread. Rats become food. The snow turns red and never melts. When the final German transmission leaves the Stalingrad pocket in February 1943, the voice crackles with desperation. The world is frozen. Tell them we fought to the last breath. Radio log, 6th Army Command bunker, and then silence. In the aftermath, over 1 million lives are lost in the city that froze and burned at once. The snow buried the bodies, but not the memories. Stalingrad would stand forever as the graveyard of empires and the birthplace of Soviet vengeance. We survived Stalingrad, but something in us never thawed again. Veteran testimony. 1960. If you're drawn into this frozen nightmare of courage and collapse, don't forget to subscribe and share this story. The war against winter has only begun. Part 3. The White Forest of Death, the Battle of the Bulge. It was so quiet that first morning we thought the war had forgotten us. Then, out of the mist, the trees began to move and we realized it hadn't. Ardennes, December 1944. The forests of Belgium lie draped in snow serene, still deceptive. American troops stationed along the front lines celebrate Christmas with what little they have: a tin of beans, a cigarette, a memory of home. They don't know that Hitler's last gamble, the Ardennes offensive, is about to fall upon them like a ghostly avalanche. At dawn, the white silence explodes. Shells tear through the forest canopy, and panzers emerge from the fog, painted white for camouflage. The Americans are caught off guard, surrounded, outgunned, frozen. The snow was knee-deep, and blood froze before it touched the ground. We couldn't tell if we were fighting men or shadows. Private Harold Price, 101st Airborne. The Battle of the Bulge becomes the largest and bloodiest battle fought by American forces in Europe. Temperatures plunge below 25 C. Vehicles refuse to start. Machine guns seize. Even morphine syringes freeze solid. The forests become graveyards, trees splintered by artillery, foxholes filled with snow and silence. For many soldiers, frostbite is the first enemy they meet each morning. We'd sleep sitting up, afraid to lie down, afraid we wouldn't wake again. Sergeant Elec Donley. Bastogne. In the besieged town of Bastogne, the 101st Airborne Division is encircled, their supplies cut off. They have no winter uniforms, little ammunition, and no way to evacuate the wounded. But when the German commander sends an ultimatum demanding surrender, General Anthony McAuliffe replies with a single word: nuts. That one defiant word becomes the heartbeat of Bastogne. With courage, improvisation, and sheer stubbornness, the Americans dig in, holding the line against tanks, blizzards, and despair. We'd lost track of days. We measure time by how many fingers we had left. Medic's diary. 1944. When the skies finally clear, Allied planes drop supplies through the flurries. Soldiers weep as crates of food and ammunition crash into the snow. The tide turns once more, but the victory comes at a terrible cost: over 80,000 Allied casualties. Thousands are crippled by frostbite. Others never return home. As the fires die out and spring returns, villagers find bodies still frozen in foxholes, rifles in their hands, expressions calm as if asleep. We found them sitting together under a tree. They died with their arms around each other. Belgian villager. Interviewed 1945. The forest of Ardennes would thaw, but for the survivors the frost would never melt. They said winter was cruel, but it also revealed what men were truly made of. Veteran. Battle of the Bulge reunion. 1975. If this glimpse into the frozen forests of courage and loss moved you, subscribe, like, and stay with us as we march deeper into the cold hell where eyes, hunger, and hope collide on history's coldest front lines. Part 4. Frozen in the east, the long retreat from Russia. We no longer marched. We just fell forward one step at a time. German Soldier's Diary. 1943. The winter of 1943-44. The once mighty German army that had surged into Russia now staggers backward, crippled, starving, frostbitten. The Eastern Front, once a symbol of triumph, has become a corridor of ghosts. For the retreating soldiers, every mile west feels endless. The snow is knee-deep, supplies gone, fuel frozen, and morale shattered. The Red Army presses relentlessly from behind, and the cold closes in from all sides. Our trucks froze solid. Horses lay dead on the road. We burn maps to keep our hands from turning black. Private Karl Mertens. Retreating near Smolensk, entire divisions dissolve into blizzards. Those who fall behind vanish beneath the snow, their names erased by the wind. The dead become landmarks, frozen bodies used to guide the living towards safety. The cold spares no one. German, Russian, civilian, all are consumed by the same white inferno. Villages become fortresses of misery. Women and children huddle in cellars, melting snow for water, praying for silence. The air smells of frost and smoke and fear. The fields were littered with frozen men and shattered dreams. We buried them in snow because the ground was too hard to dig. Field Chaplain's Letter. 1944. The retreat is not just physical. It is spiritual, a collapse of certainty, of ideology, of humanity. The soldiers once promised glory now beg for warmth, bread and mercy. Every fire they light to survive risks revealing their position. Every breath they exhale becomes a white plume, visible to death itself. One night, the temperature dropped to -40. My comrade whispered that he could feel his heart slowing. When dawn came, he was still sitting beside me, but his eyes were frozen open. Diary of a German radio operator. In the chaos, the Soviet pursuit is merciless. Tanks grind forward through drifts of snow, crushing what's left of the Wehrmacht's frozen retreat. But even the victors pay a heavy toll. Frostbite, starvation, and exhaustion haunt both sides. We did not cheer when they ran. We were too cold to feel anything. Soviet infantrymen. 3rd Guards Army. By the time the retreat reaches Poland, the road is lined with twisted wrecks, a frozen graveyard stretching to the horizon. Those who survive carry home not medals, but memories too heavy to thaw. The snow kept their secrets. The world would remember their words, but never their winters, historians note. 1950. If this haunting march through the frozen East gripped you, subscribe and share this documentary to help keep these forgotten soldiers' stories alive. The next chapter of The Cold Hell reveals what happens when the mind freezes before the body does. Part 5. The Frost Inside. Psychological collapse on the winter front. The cold didn't just take our fingers. It took our thoughts. Soviet Infantry Diary 1942. War had already broken bodies. Now, in the endless white silence, it began to break minds. The soldiers of the Eastern and Western fronts were not merely frozen, they were haunted. Cut off from warmth, sleep, and sanity, many slipped into what the medics called winter madness. You start to hear things, laughter in the blizzard, footsteps that aren't there. At first, you think it's the enemy. Then you realize it's your own head. German medic 1943. The human mind is not built for such isolation. Days blurred into nights, weeks into white oblivion. The snow swallowed sound, the frost slowed thought. Men stared at the horizon until it began to stare back. Some became silent, staring at their hands as if they no longer belonged to them. Others laughed uncontrollably, then fell quiet, eyes glassy, lips blue. And some, in moments of delirium, walked naked into the snow, believing they were walking home. He said he saw his mother calling from across the field. We found him in the morning smiling. Entry from a Red Army nurse's report. The hunger made it worse. When rations vanished, soldiers began to hallucinate meals, smells, entire feasts that weren't there. They'd speak of dinner tables from childhood, their voices trembling with joy until the cold reminded them where they truly were. I dreamed of soup. I could smell it. I woke up licking snow. Private militaries. Orlov, Stalingrad survivor, and yet, through it all, there were flickers of resilience. Men reading torn Bible pages aloud. Soldiers writing letters they'd never send. Comrades sharing body heat, the stave of both death and despair. Tiny sparks of humanity against an endless winter night, but even when the sun rose, the frost remained inside. Psychiatrists after the war found that many veterans carried what they called the cold that never left, hands trembling in midsummer, hearts racing at the sound of wind, a lifetime echo of those frozen days. We left the front, but it never left us. Soviet veteran testimony 1965. The winter didn't just destroy armies. It dismantled the human spirit piece by frozen piece until what was left was something that barely resembled a man. And yet, somehow, enough warmth remained to keep them walking. Just a little farther. If this look inside the frozen minds of war haunts you, subscribe, like, and share to help bring more of these unseen human truths from the shadows of history. Next, we march into the hunger where snow was not the only thing soldiers had to swallow. Part 6. Starvation and survival. Eating snow. Eating hope, the cold we could fight. The hunger we could only endure. Diary of a German private. January 1943. As the blizzards howled across the battlefields of Stalingrad, Leningrad, and the Ardennes, another invisible enemy crept through the ranks. Starvation. Men who had once carried rifles now carried empty tins and desperate eyes. The supply lines had frozen solid. Bread froze into bricks. Potatoes became rocks. The living envied the dead because the dead no longer felt hunger. I broke the ice from a horse's mouth to get a drink. The horse was already dead. Letter found near Stalingrad. Soldiers melted snow in helmets, scraping soot into the water to make it taste like soup. They chewed leather straps, boiled belts, or gnawed on frozen bark. When a comrade died, a silent understanding often passed between the survivors. A horror no one dared name aloud. We told ourselves it was just to survive one more day. But afterward, we never spoke of it again. Soviet rifleman's confession, recorded 1944 on both sides. Commanders tried to keep morale alive. Rations were promised but never came. Rumors of food convoys spread like wildfire, then vanished like smoke. Men scoured the snow for grains, anything that could trick the body into believing it was full. I swallowed buttons once just to feel something in my stomach. Field nurse's testimony. 19 for dot in Leningrad, where the siege had lasted for over 800 days. Civilians faced hunger that transcended imagination. They boiled wallpaper for the flour in its glue, made bread from sawdust, and burned furniture to cook imaginary meals. Children drew pictures of food they would never taste again. We at the library. The books were useless anyway, no one could read from weakness. Leningrad survivor. 19 for 3. Hunger reshaped humanity. It stripped away rank, pride, and morality, leaving only the instinct to stay alive. And yet, amidst the horror, there were moments of astonishing compassion. A soldier splitting his last crust of bread with a wounded comrade, a mother in Leningrad feeding her child instead of herself. Tiny rebellions against a world gone inhuman. He gave me half his bread. I don't remember his name, but I remember his hands trembling, but alive. Civilians' testimony. 19 for 3. Why there was end. Millions had died not from bullets, but from emptiness, the slow, invisible weapon that kills hope before the body. And still, some survived. They carried no medals, only memories of what it means to hunger for life itself. I still cannot waste food. Every crumb is a life. Veteran interview. 1978. If this glimpse into the hunger of war moved you, help keep these forgotten truths alive. Subscribe, like, and share to honor those who endured when the world froze over. Next we march into Part 7. The last winter when the world stopped fighting. Part 7. The last winter when the world stopped fighting. We didn't cheer when it ended. We just stood there. Too cold, too tired, too human. Sergeant William Kruger. 19 for 5. The winter of 1944 to 45. Across Europe and the East, the war gasps its final, frozen breath. The armies that once raced toward glory now crawled through snow and mud toward home or toward surrender. In the ruins of Warsaw, Budapest, and Berlin, the smoke of dying empires rises into the winter sky. The ground is littered with the wreckage of dreams, tanks entombed in ice, helmets half buried in frozen mud, and letters that never reach their destination. The soldiers are hollow-eyed, their uniforms little more than rags. They have stopped speaking of victory. They speak only of warmth. We didn't count days anymore. We counted matches, hoping to light one before night came. Soviet soldiers log. January 19 for 5. For the German troops, retreat has turned into collapse. They march westward, thousands of prisoners, frostbitten and starved, swallowed by the snow they once believed would lead them to conquest. In the east, Soviet soldiers advance, driven by vengeance and loss, their faces hardened by 3 years of ice and death. In the west, American and British forces push through the last frozen valleys of the Ardennes. Snow mixes with smoke as towns fall silent. The war that began in summer ends in eternal winter. We walked into villages where no one spoke, just the wind, blowing through empty windows. Lieutenant Peter Hammond, U.S. Army. The civilians, too, emerge like shadows, hollow, starving, wrapped in blankets that no longer keep out the cold. For them, peace doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like survival. Children play in the ruins. Women search the rubble for lost names. The old stand by the roadsides, staring at passing convoys as if watching history drive away. The war ended, but we didn't feel alive. We were just less dead. German nurse. 19 for 5. As spring approaches, the thaw begins, rivers crack open. Ice drips from the ruins, but the cold remains inside those who lived it. The survivors find themselves in a strange silence. No gunfire, no orders, no purpose, just the sound of melting snow, and the question that echoes in every heart, was it worth it? I went home, but home wasn't there anymore. Red Army Veteran, Memoir. 19 for 7. The last winter of the war was not a triumph, it was a sigh. A quiet, shivering exhale from a world that had seen too much, felt too little, and lost almost everything. When the world stopped fighting, it didn't feel like peace. It felt like the cold finally ran out of things to kill. Historian's reflection. 1960. If this haunting calm after the storm moves you, help keep these memories alive. Subscribe, like, and share to honor the silence that followed the world's coldest war. Next, we conclude the cold hell with the stories of those who lived to tell what the frost could never bury. Part 8. Echoes of frost, the survivors' voices. We lived through it, but it never truly left us. Soviet veteran. Interview 1975. When the guns fell silent, The cold remained, not in the air, but in the bones, in the hearts, in the eyes of those who had seen winter turn men into shadows. Across Europe, veterans returned home carrying ghosts, not of the enemy, but of themselves. The frost had changed them. It had taught them what pain could endure, and what hope could survive, even in summer. I still wore gloves. I told people it was habit, but the truth is, I could still feel the cold. German infantryman, Memoir 1952. The war's end didn't bring warmth. Families reunited with men they barely recognized, quiet, hollow-eyed figures who flinched at the sound of wind, who stared too long at the snow. They spoke little of the front. When they did, they chose their words carefully, as if afraid the cold might return if they named it. We had survived the frost. The hunger, the fear, but peace was harder. British nurse. 1946. The medical record spoke of frostbite, trench foot, gangrene. But the true wounds, those of the mind, had no diagnosis then. Nightmares of white wastelands, the sound of cracking ice, the silence of friends who froze beside them. Doctors called it war nerves. Today, we call it trauma. I dreamed the snow was falling again, and when I woke up, I was crying. But it was summer. Leningrad survivor. For the civilians, the winters had carved scars that would last generations. Mothers who'd boiled wallpaper to feed their children. Children who'd grown up without laughter, measuring life in days survived rather than years lived. Yet somehow, from that frozen misery, humanity began to rebuild. Church bells rang again. Markets reopened. Flowers grew in bomb craters. But beneath every thought street, beneath every new foundation stone, lay the bones of those who had not survived the frost. When spring came, we planted gardens where they fell. The earth was soft again. But it still remembered. Elderly woman, Stalingrad. 1948. The winters of war had taken millions, but they had also revealed the rawest truth about humankind, that even in the darkest, coldest corners of history, life clings on. A spark, a breath, a heartbeat. Even in the cold hell, something refused to die. We were frozen. Yes, but not defeated. Soviet engineer. Berlin. 1945. Now, 80 years later, the frost has melted. But its echoes remain in the stories we tell, in the trembling voices of veterans, in the silent photographs of snow-covered trenches, in the eyes of those who remember. And when the winter wind howls, it carries their whispers still. Remember us, not as soldiers, not as victims, but as people who endured the cold and walked back into the sun. Dedication written at the Stalingrad Memorial. If the cold hell touch you, if these frozen voices still echo in your heart, subscribe, like, and share this story to keep their memories alive. Every view, every comment, every share is one more act of remembrance against the frost of forgetting.